by doing that, you're just going to immerse yourself in love, because those foods are just like nature's love for you, and you can't help but feel more connected to yourself, and more satiated, and just feel better and better. Here I come to save the day.
So excited and so honored to have you here.
Oh, blessed to be on here and to
I already
connect like this.
introduced you a little bit,
Sorry?
um, and told people that you're already raw vegan for 18 years, right?
Yeah, I just hit my 18th birthday this spring.
That's amazing. Yeah, and before getting into today's life, I just want to share my appreciation and my deep gratitude for you. You're such an
Oh,
inspiration, and you always remind me that the raw vegan lifestyle is something enjoyable, something exciting and creative, and to not take it so seriously. It's not all just about health. So I just wanted to say big, big thank you. Yeah, you have this uplifting, positive attitude and mindset, and yeah, it's really nice.
appreciate that a ton. I couldn't wish for anything more, really, because I've been really hard on myself, and I've taken it too seriously in the past. And, I had some growing pains through that. And I guess that's what led me to having that message. But it's a real blessing to hear that that resonates and it's helped you a bit.
Absolutely, yeah. So tell us a little bit about your story. How has your relationship with food evolved throughout the years? How was it in the beginning, and how is it today?
Well, that's a great question. And I mean, we could take the whole hour if we wanted to just talking about that, but
Yeah.
I'll really try not to. I'll try not to. So, I mean, I think when I was younger, I was just oblivious to having a relationship with food beyond it just being like pleasure. It was just like, this is pleasurable. This is good. I like that. Like more is better. And, I was really active. Like my whole life, I've been skateboarding since I was 5 years old. I don't remember life before it. And I've always had a huge appetite and the ability to eat large amounts of food, so it was whatever I could get my hands on, I ate. And, I remember going home at lunch and like eating like 20 pierogies. I don't know if everyone knows what pierogies are, or like, like pizza pops, like four pizza pops. And my brother would get pissed off at me because he'd be like, we're only supposed to have one at a time. And I'd need four because I was just like a pig and really active. And I don't mean that to demean pigs. They're amazing. But I ate a lot and just anything. So that carried on until I was probably, I guess, 17 and a half. I moved out from home. My mom and dad, my mom made good food, mostly whole food based stuff, but
Wow.
there was still like animal products and some processed stuff in there. And anything I could get her to buy me, like ice cream and chips and stuff, I ate as much as I could. But again, yeah, the upbringing, I generally just didn't know that there was such a thing as having a relationship with food, and it was just like pleasure. When I moved out, things went a little south, and I started basically eating fast food or like rice and milk or eggs, like just cheap stuff because I was really poor. I graduated school early just to move to Vancouver to skateboard, and I was living off of like $10 a day max, and just kind of slumming it. And progressively, I think my relationship with food became more apparent that it was like just whatever I could get. Like it wasn't really to nourish me anymore. It's just whatever I could get. And slowly, I started drinking more, smoking cigarettes, smoking weed a lot, um,
Wow.
eating worse and worse, just like trying to actually eat the grossest stuff. I think possibly to partially to numb, but also just like for extra enjoyment because my life was becoming a little less enjoyable because I was feeling worse and worse and hurting more and more from not healing well and drinking more and more. So it was a kind of a downward spiral. I started really utilizing food as a means to cope, and alcohol even more as a means to cope. And it was really foods that didn't really love me back, and it was showing. Um, then when I was about 18 and a half-ish, 19, it was just kind of came to a head. And I was really falling apart, really depressed, didn't want to wake up in the mornings. I'd go to bed hoping I wouldn't wake up. And I found yoga. Of all places, I found it in a Walmart bulk VHS tape rack. This was probably 99. It was a Rodney Yee intermediate power yoga VHS tape. It was like $2, and I started doing that daily. And that really, I think, started to form having just more of a relationship with myself and my breath, and being more aware of the impacts of food. Because before that, I thought it was a pleasure hole, and I was so interested in the yoga tape and started bringing so many benefits. I started looking into yogic philosophy, which talked about, like not only prana, but also about karma and a whole bunch of other things, right?
Yeah.
So an interest in nutrition was born. I found a book on nutrition called Fit for Life. It was one of those moments where I went to a used bookstore knowing I wanted a book on food and nutrition, but I didn't know what I was looking for. And just one book was on the shelf glowing. It was like one of those movie moments, like, yeah, and I was like, this is it. Have you ever had those kind of moments where it's just like, it's almost like you didn't have a choice, but you did, but it's just like, it was made up for you? So, yeah, so I grabbed that book and it just blew my mind. It just totally blew my mind. It's the most sold book on nutrition in the world, or at least it was up till a few years ago, at least. It's been translated into like 60
Wow.
some languages. And it's really great because it's basically like an introduction to vegetarian, vegan, raw food, and natural hygiene and
And
food
that is
combining.
the most sold book?
Yeah,
Wow,
yeah,
that's
it's
cool.
amazing. It really, like, you could go to any used bookstore and find like a dozen copies, and they made a couple books, but that's the first one's the best. It's called Fit for Life. It's one of those books that I'd recommend anyone who's just looking to upgrade their food plan that doesn't really have any kind of focus or direction to go in that
Mm-hmm.
direction, because it talks about the importance of eating fruit for breakfast on an empty stomach. It talks
Wow,
about
that's
food
cool.
combining. It talks about vegetarian and vegan and raw food diets. Talks about low fat. Talks about exercise, sunshine, like all the good stuff, right? And I was just like, whoa, you know. So from there, I started to actually become more aware of food, how it influences my body, mind, spirit, my thought patterns, like everything, and started trying to incorporate more and more and more fruits and vegetables into my life. It was about a 4.5 year process between like smoking, drinking, and eating like bacon double cheeseburger pizzas every day. Because I used that used to be like right before that. I'd have a bacon double cheeseburger pizza for lunch, and I'd have a couple slices left for dinner, which I'd chase down with a 40 ounce of beer and whatever else I could cook at home.
Wow.
Um, so yeah, so it's about a 4.5 year period where I just progressively let go of things while adding in more whole foods and more plant foods and continually researching. And yeah, it was around that time that I wanted to become a chef, but I couldn't find a vegan chefing school because I'd just gone vegan. And instead, I went into holistic nutrition. And I'm really happy I did, because I think if I would have just went right into vegan chefing or chefing, I think it would have been a different story, because it
Mhm.
was through that nutrition school that I met Dr. Doug Graham, who's the author of the
Wow.
80-10-10 diet. And yeah, I met him the next day. I went raw, and my whole life just changed. My heart center blew open, and I was like, "This is why I'm here on the planet, to share this message. To help people with holistic health and raw food." Because before that, 4.5 years of studying nutrition and applying things for that entire time, but it was still selfish. It was really just for me and for skateboarding. I had zero intention of using it as a career. I just wanted to basically heal faster from chucking my body downstairs on my skateboard, and it changed my life. Yeah, it changed my life. So that was now 18 years ago. I took about 4.5 years to really develop a really balanced relationship with myself and with food, because as you know, and most people, well, not most people, but a lot of people know that when you adopt a raw food diet, it brings a lot up. It's not just like rainbows and happiness all the time. It asks you to look at all the
Absolutely.
dark corners and cobwebs and shadow self. And so for about 4.5 years, I really focused on that. And then I started promoting myself as a raw food coach and a chef, and wrote my first book. And now that's been 12 years, like full time. This is all I do for the last 12 years, is share this message and help people on their path, and write recipe books and speak at festivals, teach yoga, do retreats and all that fun stuff. So that's a
Amazing.
synopsis.
It's so incredible to hear that, people like you who I look up to so much have also had a past where they were eating crab and,
Oh man.
had like, all these challenges to overcome. And so what's your, like, have helped you to overcome that need, that urge to suppress your feelings with food? Because yeah, as you said, like on a raw vegan diet, like everything is so intense, like you can
Yeah.
feel everything, and
Yeah.
sometimes it can be challenging, I feel, to deal with that overwhelm of things. Of course, it's also nice. What I really enjoy about it is that when I have nice experiences with people, and you know, I have these amazing experiences, then I also feel that more intensely, and
Yeah.
it's so much more deep in a way. But yeah, what has helped you to kind of overcome that yeah, need to suppress and numb your feelings with cooked food?
That's a big one. That's a really big one. I think in the very beginning when I started changing my diet, I wasn't super aware of it because I was still eating fairly heavy foods at night, even though it was vegetarian and then vegan. And as my diet got lighter and lighter, I became more aware of how big of an impact and how numbing certain foods can be. And I needed to develop other coping mechanisms, you know. So I think what it came down to is, you know, expressing myself even more in skateboarding, and also I was really way more active. I started just like biking and going around a lot, stuff like that, and then still also just being as easy as I could with myself and allowing myself foods in those beginning months when I was high raw vegan to have, you know, potatoes and all that stuff for the 6 months before I went raw vegan. Um, it was funny because when I went all raw vegan, I think it's because I had like a 4.5 year transition. I felt pretty clear, and when I got onto all raw food, I felt like rocket fuel. So really, the first like 8 months, I just felt so dang good all the time. Like I just felt like I was like supercharged. I just met my purpose. Like I was so clear that this is what I wanted to do for my living and my life, that I didn't. It wasn't hard. I was just always on such a high. Um, I often say it's like the raw food honeymoon. You know, it's like the first while you're just like
That's
buzzing. You
cool.
know, just
Yeah.
buzzing. But that did come to a head, and I found myself in a really emotional place where I decided to eat food. Well, I guess I wouldn't even say I decided. I kind of fell into, kind of fell off into foods that I swore up and down I would never ever eat again. So it was
Mm.
like 8 months into being raw, and I remember I was going on a trip to California with a bunch of friends that I grew up. I basically learned how to drink and party with. You know, like I met them in Alberta, and I moved to Alberta when I was 18 because the legal drinking age was 18. And so I went on this trip to California with them on like a $2 or $3 a day budget. It was my first trip as a raw foodist, and I didn't know what I was doing. I still didn't really understand caloric density, and I was at the lowest body weight that I've got to while eating. I was at like 155 pounds. I'm 180 now, so quite a bit thinner. And very quickly, I ran out of money and food, and I was trying to eat basically raisins and water while traveling and skateboarding with like all my friends who were partying, eating
Wow.
McDonald's and smoking and skating really good. And I fell into old patterns of depression and negative self-talk, and my joints started hurting because it's such a low body weight. And I remember one night they were all partying at a beach campsite, and I was like, I just got to go for a walk. And I went for a walk, and I stopped at a convenience store, and I was like, like just like buzzing and kind of manic in my head. And I went and bought a Snickers bar, and I was like, as soon as I had that Snickers bar, I judged myself really harshly. I'm like, you're a failure, you're a hypocrite, you're a
Mm.
loser, like I hate you, like. And I felt so horrible. I ran to the fast food restaurant and I ate a bacon double cheeseburger, no, chili cheeseburger. And at that time, I'd been, you know, vegan for just over a year and a half and vegetarian for about 3 years before that. So it had been like 4.5, 5 years since I've had, yeah, about 4.5 years since I'd had meat. But at that moment, I hated myself and I didn't care. You know, I didn't care about anything. And so I had that and chili cheese fries, and I just sat there so depressed and feeling like such a loser and a faker. And you know, because I was telling my friends like I'm going to be raw vegan for life and this and that, and then it all fell apart. And I went back to that campsite and I didn't tell them anything. I kept it all secret. And until a few days later when we were heading back home, and I wanted to stop in Seattle and skateboard more. And no one wanted to. And I was like, if we do, I'll have some alcohol. And they're like, what? Like, because I wasn't drinking. I hadn't drank since before I went raw. And so I had 2 beers, felt sick, and didn't even skate the next day because I felt so shitty. And yeah, long story short, that was my first big fall off the wagon, and I absolutely loathed myself for it. Like um, I saw those foods as evil and bad, and judged myself as being a bad person because I chose them.
Mhm.
And it took me a few days to kind of recoup with just I fasted when I got back to Vancouver, and got back on a really simple raw food plan. And I was raw for like I think about double that time, so about 16 months after that. And it didn't take long to feel good, but emotionally, that like judgment of self, it wore on me for years because I never shared that story with anyone for probably like 7 or 8 years, and I held that within myself, and it was really tough.
Wow, I can't even begin to imagine how one must feel, after having been raw for so long and
Mhm.
then eating like bacon. Yeah, that must have been really horrible. But I feel like those are the moments that where you can go really deep. Like if you kind of fall off the wagon, if you want to call it, but then you accept it. And if
Mhm.
you beat yourself up, then you accept that and you get into that deep state of surrender. I feel
Yeah,
like when we do that, that is the time where we really transform our mind, our spirit, and our body. And that's really where we become more into this, and where we also realize like I don't want to feel like this again. And that's
yeah,
always what motivates me, like thinking back
mhm,
about I also had a couple
mhm,
of times where I kind of ate things that I actually don't want to eat anymore because I know I feel like crap when I do it.
mhm,
But accepting it and surrendering to it has helped me so much. And now I
mhm.
just know, like, I remember how I felt the day after, and I don't want to feel like this anymore. I'm really
Yeah,
tired of it.
yeah.
So that kind of really motivates me to, yeah, nurture my body with the foods that are vibrant and that are alive. And so I feel vibrant and alive. So,
Absolutely. That's
yeah.
such a powerful shift, that shift of awareness to know, like, you're worth it, you deserve it, and to actually want to treat yourself well rather than think you should. I think a lot of people get into health and they're kind of bound by rules, or they feel like,
Mm.
this is bad, so I shouldn't have that, and this is good, so I should have that. But when you actually get that clarity, and like you said, you're in that awareness while you're eating foods, and you really get clear on what you truly want, then it just makes things so much easier.
Absolutely. Yeah. And something that I feel also often has to do with people overeating is that they like overeating on foods that they actually, want to leave behind in a way, is that they don't eat enough fruit during the day. And I feel the reason for that is that most people, including myself, love high water content fruit like watermelons and
Yeah,
papayas. I love watermelon and papaya.
very good.
And the problem with those fruits, though, is that they are like super low in calories.
Yeah,
So how can we make sure to eat enough during the day? What has helped you? What is something
yeah,
that
that's
you
huge. Because yeah,
do?
like I said, in my first 8 months raw, I didn't understand that. Like, I didn't understand caloric density, and how big of a difference it is. Because, for example, like, to get my calories, if I eat like around 8 or 9 pounds of bananas, I'm good. But if I was eating watermelon, I'd have to eat like 22 pounds. And if I was eating lettuce, I'd need to eat like 45 pounds, like, it, way past your digestive capacity. I've done it on watermelon. I know a lot of people who do Watermelon Island, but it takes a lot of peeing. It really does. Um, so what I usually find, especially in the first few weeks, months, and even year or two of being a raw foodist, it usually requires at least 3 to 5 meals per day, with fruit being the central part of at least, 2 or 4 of those meals. And usually, what I see people have the most success with is if the first meal of the day is the higher water content meal. So that's, like, you have some water and you hydrate even more with the watermelon or citrus or anything like that. But then lunch meal, if you're having 3 meals a day, is going to be a sweeter fruit meal, which is way more calories per gram. So whether that's bananas or pears or dates, or like a date smoothie, or mamey or jackfruit or whatever it may be, but a sweet fruit. And then dinner, still even starting with fruit, but again, something juicy, and then going into the salad meal. And for some people, when they're eating 4 meals a day or 5 meals a day, it might be two sweet meals at lunch. Like, it might be like 11 o'clock, and then at like 1:30 or 2 o'clock. And sometimes if people are active and they require a lot of calories, what I recommend they do is just make one big sweet smoothie, but then divide it into two bottles that are, let's say, like 750 mils to 1 liter. And then it just simplifies things. You know, when they're first hungry at 11 or so on their lunch, they have the first one. And then whenever they're ready, they have the second one. And over time, those may merge into one meal as your digestive system really adapts, and you get used to larger quantities of food. But it requires a lot, right? So it really does take expanding your conception of how much food is enough, releasing fear of fruit, and progressively overloading. Just like with muscle building, progressively overloading with food, it's like when you're talking about high water content foods, it's finding that balance between as much as you enjoy and as much as you can at every meal. And progressively that just leads to bigger meals with less frequency.
Mm. Wow, that tip with the two smoothies and preparing them beforehand, that's really nice. Yeah,
It
I
makes
love
things
that
so
tip.
much easier. It really makes things a lot easier.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you can't always stand in the kitchen the whole day.
No, exactly, yeah. And I mean, and
Yeah.
sometimes with some people, what works really good, because green smoothies usually don't keep as well. But let's say you make a big banana smoothie or a big date smoothie or a date blueberry smoothie. You pour the first liter or 750 milliliters into a bottle, and then you add a whole bunch of greens to the second one and blend that, and then you have that as your first, and then the other one as the second. And that way you can get a little bit of different, or you can add a different, like some extra berries or something to change it up a little bit to the other. But having the same base, it just makes things a lot quicker and easier to prepare.
Mm. Wow, that's an awesome tip as well. And also something like I feel like only the minority of the people are actually approaching the raw vegan diet with that mindset of long-lasting health. I feel
Mm.
like many people are actually looking for a quick fix, weight loss, detox, cleansing. So what would you say to someone to help them shift their focus away from, the quick fix to, yeah, really long lasting health? Because I feel like that's also one of the big reasons why people are struggling so much with their relationship with food, because they are always out for quick fixes.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, I think part of it stems back to kind of what we were talking about with the way we look at foods, and if we label foods as good and bad, or like us being better if we're eating a certain way or not as good if we're eating a certain way. Um, if someone's in a tough situation and they need to heal from something, then yeah, you might want to dive all in and be really simple and strict in a sense, like if you're already walking a tightrope, well, then sometimes it can be beneficial to really go that way. But for most people, the more you kind of go with that quick fix, like 90 miles per hour to the goal, the more sharp zigzags you're going to have, and the more people end up falling off and having a little bit of a harder time emotionally with it. So
Mhm.
sometimes it's about just slow and steady wins the race, progressively adding more and seeing this as a long-term lifestyle rather than, again, like a short-term protocol. I saw a quote from Mastering Diabetes today, which I really, really liked. And it was essentially saying that, like, um, it was saying, like a consistent lifestyle for 365 days is way better than a short-term 30-day protocol, and it's just,
Mhm.
you know, making a lifestyle out of it. Diets don't work, lifestyles work, right? So if you're doing something that doesn't sustainable and you're expecting to get all the results from that, I mean, sure, that can be a step in someone's journey, but it can be a slippery slope into, prolonged kind of detox lifestyle, which doesn't really lead you to a healthy lifestyle. So,
Absolutely. I can totally relate to that. I remember in the beginning when I got into raw foods, I was a lot into intermittent fasting and one
yeah.
meal a day. And I was so obsessed with cleansing and detox. And I mean, of course, in the beginning, it was working out and I felt amazing. I had, big shifts happening inside of me and everything. However, after 1 year or something, the whole thing started collapsing and I didn't feel good anymore. I was in all those boxes that I've put myself in, and
Yeah.
it took quite a while to get out of all of those boxes again.
Yeah.
So I really love that quote. I actually saw it in your story today. So
Yeah.
yeah. It's
It's
really
a good
cool.
one. It really is a good one, you know, and I think kind of like you said, you know, we can put ourselves into some boxes and not have flexibility. And, you know, like with intermittent fasting, it's really interesting because, you know, people often quote science around it and you know, say it's beneficial for this, it's beneficial for that. But what a lot of people don't recognize is that science is based on taking someone on a normal diet and
Mhm.
using intermittent fasting. Whereas when we're talking about a raw food diet, the number one reason that people have a hard time with a raw food diet is under eating, you know, and so if all of a sudden like someone's new to this and you shorten the window and you're like, all right, now you got to eat even more in this small window, I just end up seeing it lead to people kind of waste away and you know be pushing their digestive system past the point of ease and end up with poor absorption. And so it's to me it's basically like intermittent fasting is kind of a band-aid for a poor diet, and when you step into a more natural raw food diet, it's not really necessary, but as a consequence of eating larger meals and your digestive system adapting, you may at some point find that you intermittent fast, but it's not in the sense
Exactly.
of like forcing it and being like, I'm not eating till one. It's just you may not actually be hungry for the first 2 or 3 hours of the day, and then your eating window is a little different than by the clock.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's also what I've experienced. Like in the morning, right after getting up, I don't feel like having food. So obviously, I honor that. But now, something that has changed is if I wake up and I'm feeling hungry, then obviously I'm gonna make some food. And
Yeah,
that was just, I mean, it's so obvious, but
yeah,
to me, it was kind of like, yeah, not obvious in the beginning because I thought, people online were saying like you have to do it that
yeah.
way and you have to restrict until one. And like I was buying into that, but obviously, yeah, we like if we free ourselves from those concepts and those ideas, and we actually start listening to our body, what it is telling us, yeah, then we will obviously be successful on the
Absolutely.
lifestyle.
I think that we're really easily fooled into being clever and into thinking we know better, you know, and like that it's got to be complicated and it's got to be like super science and in my experience, like true health comes from healthful living, which is the natural result of just following Mother Nature, you know, and Mother Nature knows best. It's really, really simple. It's like when you're hungry, eat the foods we're designed for. You know, when you're tired, sleep. You know, when you're thirsty, have some water. You know, like when you feel like move and have fun, right? Like it's the simple, simple truths that to many people are too simple. But you just follow those basic guidelines, and life gets a lot easier and more buoyant and happier and more energetic. And there's nuance to it, of course, but the generalities of that kind of ring true.
Mhm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's so true. And yeah, and you also wrote a meal plan for the raw vegan bundle.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
would you like to share a little bit about that?
Mhm. Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I just got my my Glog. It's actually not Glog.
Mm,
It's just a banana smoothie. So it's
nice.
I like to put banana smoothies in fancy bottles and feel like double fancy. Sometimes I put them in beer
Yeah.
bottles with a paper bag and you know feel like I'm slumming it again. But yeah, my meal plan is the 21-day summer meal plan. It's the fourth in a series of seasonal meal plans, and it's really fun because it really takes what's in season in your hemisphere for the summer months and brings them all together into breakfast recipes, lunch recipes, fruit starter recipes, which is what I mentioned, kind of a big tip I find, just having your beginning your dinner meal with some fruit, and then some savory dinner recipes. And it has shopping lists for both a semi-active, about 130-pound female, and a semi-active, about 150-pound male. So it breaks those down and shows like the approximate caloric intake that those activity levels and body types would need. Um, and yeah, it kind of progressively, it starts with really, really simple recipes and progressively gets a little bit more fancy with the dinners, trying to kind of showcase food combining, sequential eating, high water content foods, and kind of all the principles we talked about. And it's a lot of fun. It's a bunch of my
Mhm.
favorite recipes, and some are as simple as one ingredient, you know, like mono meals, whether it's a smoothie or just sit down to a meal of peaches, right? And otherwise, though, the last meal of the meal plan is my my barbecue, smoky barbecue pizza. So it's
Wow.
a mix of everything.
Cool. Was it your trip to McDonald's after the few years that led you to making that recipe, or?
The funny thing is, when I first got into raw food, like it was really from a hygienic approach, and it was like basically like the first 5 years of raw food, besides that major fall off that like I talked about, and one other one. I really like I didn't have any garlic or onions or hot peppers or like it's just fruits and greens and very little nuts and seeds. It's really, really simple. And I felt really good. And I wrote my first book and I started my website, but I didn't have any desire to have anything fancier. Like I remember when I first made like zucchini noodles, like 12 years ago, I was like, holy crap, this is insane. I can't believe this. Like, whoa, my mind's blown. And so I made my first book, 101 freaking awesome recipes, really simple, hygienic food combined stuff. But very shortly after that, I was like, not everyone just wants to eat bananas and lettuce and, like really simple recipes. So I wanted to start making fancier stuff. But I remember, for example, the first time that I went to the store and I bought hot pepper, because I was so like entrenched in hygiene and I thought that was like being bad. I remember I was buying it in the grocery store and I was like looking left and right to make sure no one saw me buy it because I actually felt guilty.
Wow.
Like I
That's
was a
so
lot more
good.
strict and did still see like, things that weren't hygienic as bad, like bad for me. So I was bad if I had them.
Mm.
Um, and that weighs on you, like if you judge foods and you judge yourself because of the foods you're eating, it's going to vastly affect your energy and the way you absorb the food and digest the food. And over time, I let that go, and I just saw it as an opportunity to be clear with my experience and make a meditation of it and actually just
Oh,
see what it brings to my body and be more authentic in the moment rather than bringing like preconceived thoughts into what I was doing. And so from that, I just I really see food as fun, as nourishment, as a relationship, as we talked about. And I wanted to form some foods that really mimic old favorites. And so that's kind of what led me to the pizza and to other recipes, was just trying to bridge the gap between kind of high fat gourmet foods and low fat hygiene. Because at that time, like when I first started with the Raw Advantage, like 12 years ago, there wasn't really anything in between there. It was really like high fat gourmet or low fat hygienic. That was all I could see out there. So I started trying to make cravings busters, like low fat raw gourmet. And that culminated, I'd say, in my pizza book, which wasn't that long ago. That was only like 4.5 years ago, I think I developed it or so. Long-winded
wow.
story. Sorry, that was really long for not a good
No,
question.
it's all right. Really cool. Yeah, like like when I started, I went to a raw vegan restaurant with a friend, and it was back in Thailand, and it was super high fat. Like there was so much oil on the
Yeah,
zucchini noodles and so much salt, and like I did not feel good the day after, and I said I'm
yeah,
never gonna have raw vegan gourmet again,
yeah.
and and I didn't have it for quite some time then. But then yeah, I actually through you and then the raw vegan bundle, I discovered all these amazing recipes that are actually really like clean and everything, and I felt amazing after having them, and it's so cool.
Oh,
Like I think you're really like an you invented that kind of, because I feel like before you that hasn't really been existing, right? Or
well, at the very least, I think I popularized some things within the low-fat kind of gourmet kind of food. Like I would be lying if I said I think that no one else has ever done it, but I never saw it, and it wasn't like I didn't see recipe books out there, and I wasn't like, you know, yeah, I just kind of wanted to fill that gap that I saw there and started doing it and putting it out there, actively putting it out there.
mm. Someone is asking, what do you mean by hygienic foods?
So natural hygiene is a dietary health concept, a way of living that essentially just means the science of health. That's kind of what it stemmed from, and it's a holistic point of view. But the dietary aspects of it basically stipulate, foods that you can eat in their whole natural state and make a meal of, and feel good after are like our most natural foods. So it generally either limits or completely abstains from foods that you couldn't make a meal of, such as garlic or onions or ginger or spices, um, stuff like that, that is just really potent and pungent and stimulating, or enervating. So it's a really, really simplistic way of eating. And it's taken some different forms, and there, like I think the modern hygiene movement within the raw food scene is still alive, but there is also even a modern hygiene movement that includes some animal products and stuff like that. But the original natural hygiene is really vegetarian, vegan, and just really simple fruit, vegetable based, raw or high raw with really simple cooked vegetables.
Mhm. Nice. And something that's really important when it comes to hygienic food is also, including a lot of fruit, obviously.
Yeah.
And which tip would you give to someone who doesn't have a sweet tooth?
Yeah.
Because I feel like if people don't eat fruit, then this lifestyle won't actually work because you can't eat raw gourmet, even if it's hygienic and low fat all day. So, what
Yeah.
tip would you give to someone?
Well, that's a good question. And I first want to actually add one quick thing about hygiene and then go into that one. One major principle about hygiene is that the body does all the healing and food just provides the nutrients for healing. And that's very different from even like a naturopathic kind of look where it's like we're still using foods as cures or, like eat this to cleanse this. Whereas natural hygiene just looks at it as like food offers the tools or the nutrition for your body to do all the work. Just it's kind of a unique approach. As far as like if someone doesn't have a sweet tooth, the first thing that I would do is like I would ask that person, what are they eating right now? Because what I've typically found is anyone on any diet that doesn't desire sweet foods, uh, almost every single time, probably 99% of the time, is eating a lot more fat in their diet than they think they are. And what happens if you're eating more than like 15, 20, 25% fat in your diet, your insulin function is hindered and your body very easily is overwhelmed by sugar and fruit. And, even just eating a couple pieces of fruit all of a sudden can feel like, oh, I'm sweeted out. This is way too much. So I would assess that and then find out what their goals are. If their goals are to enjoy a high fruit-based raw food diet, well, then I would vastly decrease the fats in the diet, removing all oils and reserving fats to, about 10% to 15% of the total calories, which for most people is really like the easiest way is like like a closed handful of seeds or maybe two at the most. For most women, about a half to one small avocado, or for guys, about one avocado per day at the last meal of the day. And if you do that for a couple of days, you may undereat for a few days, but progressively your body will desire more sweet as your body basically acclimates and your insulin function gets stronger and stronger. So that's one way. The other, I guess, would be to focus in the beginning, in those first few days, on more kind of tart, subacid fruits, whether it's oranges or pineapples or melons or things that aren't quite as sweet and are higher water content, just to get things flowing in the system and to, honor the taste that you're really drawn to, like focus on whatever fruit it is that you enjoy. And progressively, you're going to be drawn to more and more dense and sweet fruits. Those are probably some of the big ones. I mean, otherwise, if you're, and again, that's kind of based on if your goal is to actually come into a higher fruit diet. Otherwise, really, when you're on a raw food diet, the two main ways that you're going to get your calories is either from fruit or from fat. And, if you're going for fat, instead of fruit, then you're going to want to limit your fruit and increase your greens and eat more acid fruits. So like pineapples, lemons, limes, papayas. Yeah, I mean, I personally don't recommend that as a sustainable long-term approach, but in season or as a test to see how it feels in your body or out of necessity, that's the best way to do higher fat, is to kind of avoid the sweet fruits and go more into the acid stuff and limit that. And otherwise, I guess if you're looking to eat a higher carb, lower fat diet, but you don't want to eat a lot of fruit, well, you can increase the amount of sprouted legumes, like sprouted chickpeas, and well, chickpeas are pretty gaseous, but lentils, mung beans, stuff like that, because they're actually decently high in calories. Um, but yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Those were some amazing tips. I have one thing to add. I feel that, or maybe to ask you, how do you feel compared to eating like a lot of sprouts? I don't know if you've ever done that compared to, eating high carb cooked vegan. Because what I've experienced, I mean, I have never had a lot of sprouts, but
Yeah.
what I just imagine from have had them a few times, um, I would probably feel better just eating, high carb cooked vegan with potatoes and
Mm.
pumpkin and sweet potatoes. What do you think about that? Or what is your
Yeah,
take on
I think that's
that?
absolutely great as well. For me, I feel my best definitely with like fruit based, like fruit and greens. And then if I basically had to pick one or the other, like high fat raw or low fat with some cooked food, like high raw, I'd way rather be low fat, high raw than 100% raw, high fat. Um, More specific to what you asked with sprouts and stuff like that. I mean, before I got into raw food, actually, I was really into sprouting. I did a lot of sprouting. I did a lot of fermenting and a lot of also like making my own breads and stuff like that. And I enjoyed that. And I mean, I've had times here in the last few years where I increased my amounts of lentil sprouts and stuff like that. Um, I guess it would depend upon how much. Like if I was trying to actually get like half of my calories from sprouts, I'd probably rather actually just eat low fat, high carbohydrate, high raw with some simply cooked sweet potatoes, squashes, and broccoli and stuff like that. But if it's just an addition to my dinner salad and I'm getting maybe a quarter of my calories, then I'd maybe prefer to stay. Because that's kind of what I do now. Is like I probably get about 2/3 of my calories from fruit at least, maybe sometimes 3/4 of my calories from fruit. And then the last quarter is like giant curries and stews and salads and stuff like that, which it could include, sprouted lentils, or it could include something like peas, or it could, which is actually, uh, um, if I buy them frozen, then they're actually, what is it called? Blanched. So they're lightly cooked, basically, like hot water for a minute. But
Mm.
yeah, that's where I find my
Yeah,
balance
I
anyway.
have them sometimes as well. Those peas, they're nice.
They're nice.
And someone asked a question, any substitute for vegan-naise? I think that's like a vegan mayonnaise.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, I mean, probably you could get the bundle there. I'm sure there is a recipe for that. In there, you can click the link in my bio or in Chris's bio. But yeah, do you have any raw vegan mayonnaise that you like?
decent. I mean, mayonnaise is kind of like a slightly sweet sour cream, like a less sour kind of white creamy sauce. I mean, the simplest one that I could think of if I wanted to keep it low fat would be something like some zucchini, some coconut jelly, maybe a little bit of lemon and a little bit of something sweet, whether that's date or date water or something like that. But I don't really have a specific recipe. I haven't recreated mayonnaise myself too much.
But I'm sure in a bundle there is a recipe.
There's
So
got to be something
um,
really close to it for sure.
yeah. Cool. Yeah. So did you have any other certain books you already talked about in the beginning about, the book, I don't remember the exact name.
Fit for life.
But exactly. Is there any other books that, have kept you on that path, or any YouTubers or any other inspiration that really like, kept you going? Of course, you met Dr. Doc Graham, who
Yeah, yeah,
initially inspired you.
yeah.
But yeah.
It's really interesting because that book, Fit for Life, was written by Harvey and Marilyn Diamond, right? And years later, I met Doug, and like I said, that he was the guy who really got me into raw. And then he wrote the 80-10-10 diet, which I personally think is the best book on human nutrition out,
Yeah.
like completely. It'd be the one book I'd recommend everyone read. But yeah, he didn't write that until about 3.5 years, 4 years after I went raw and met him. So that came out. I already felt like I had it pretty down, but I still learned a lot from that book because it's just so in depth. And I learned later that Doug learned from a raw food educator named T.C. Fry. And interestingly, both Harvey and Marilyn also learned and toured with T.C. Fry at the same time Doug did. So they both had the same influence. So really my earliest influence technically would be like TC Fry, because he taught both of them. And they just took the message of raw food, low fat, kind of higher carbohydrate, and made it wider accessible by including some cooked foods and, you know, being a little bit more of a transitionary tool. And Doug made it like really specific to just raw food, just raw food. And really, I mean, that was my progression, was those guys to Dr. Doug Graham. He was my main influence, but then I got to learn from Frederick Patenaude, Roger Haska. I learned some stuff for sure from even my first raw food book I ever read was David Wolfe, although it kind of confused me, to be honest. And then a little bit from Gabriel Cousins, and you know, and then later, you know, when I first started going to the Woodstock Fruit Festival, I met a whole bunch of people that I didn't really see too much before that. So like that's when I first met Bully Raw Christina and Karen Ramsey and Robert Lockhart, rest in peace, and Don Bennett and Dr. Sam and, you know, Ellen Livingston and so many other people who've been living this lifestyle as long or longer, many times, in some cases double the length I had. So learned a lot from all of those pioneers on the path.
Oh, that's a lot of people that you got inspired by. But how was it? So when you met Dr. Doug Graham, have you never heard about raw food at all before? So was he the one who initially got you into it when you met him in real life, or have you already been researching about it before you actually met him?
Well, you know, I mean, that first book I read, Fit for Life, it really did like touch upon a raw food diet, but because it wasn't like really pointing towards it, or like that wasn't the focus, I was just like kind of meandering towards it. I wasn't totally seeing that as like the end point. But all the research I did over that next 4.5 years just led me kind of intuitively more and more to wanting to eat more raw food and progressively getting to a point where I was basically a high raw foodist. And then it was right around the time that I started in the nutrition school that I read Nature's First Law, which was actually a very plagiarized book, word for word. But it was really interesting in that it was like the first book that like, it really made it black and white. It was like the end of every single chapter said cooked food is poison. And I was just reading this like, what the heck? Like cooked food's poison. Like, I don't want to be poisoning myself. And I don't recommend that mindset. And it's definitely not true. You know, like, I mean, everything's a gradient. You know, there's obviously some cooked foods that have more toxic properties and some that really have none. Like simply steamed vegetables have actually no toxic substances to them. But that book just got me like thinking like, okay, well, I want to go raw now. And I started trying to do raw food at that point, but I didn't understand how to do it. And then I started reading the Sun Food Diet Success System, which basically said like, you know, like eat 30% this, 30% that, 30% this. And I couldn't get it. It just didn't really gel, you know? And then it was when I met Doug, though, that it was just like, dude was just on fire. Like he exemplified what I was looking for. And he says stuff in such a clear, concise way that it's just like, of course, that makes sense. Like, yes, okay. And it just was like, it was like a click, you know? And the next day I just dove into it and it just felt like, yes, like this is it, you know? So I did know about it before, but it just didn't click, you know? It didn't really, really click until I met Doug.
Yeah, I feel like that's actually a really good point, that when we meet someone who already does this lifestyle, then we kind of get inspired so much. And like that is something, because then we have like a goal to move towards. And I feel if you have never actually met someone in real life and you're just inspiring yourself online, then if I could imagine it to be much harder to actually, you know, jump off the cliff and try this lifestyle out. I think that's why fruit festivals are also such an amazing way to kind of really get you inspired and motivated. So I think you must have been probably to a lot of fruit festivals already, now that you're on this lifestyle for so long. How was that experience for you, and how has it helped you to shift your focus, you know, to yeah?
Well, it's pretty wild, you know. I mean, I think you're totally right. Like when you're with people that have been living this and it's just like, it's just what they do, you know, then it normalizes everything. Like all of a sudden you're like, oh, we're all eating giant meals of fruit. Like, oh, like I can eat as much as I want. It's great, you know? And it's like, no one's asking you questions like, like, where are you getting your protein, or looking at you funny. And like, it's just like, it's very, very comfortable. And again, it just normalizes things. Um, yeah, fruit festivals is kind of wild. I think I have a different experience than most people because I've never been to a fruit festival without being either the head chef, a speaker, or a teacher. Like the very first festival I ever went to was the first Woodstock Festival. I had never taught or never spoken at any kind of event before that, but I was just thrown in as the head chef, a presenter, and a yoga teacher. And so I've just always been in service every festival I've been to. And I think I've been to at least 20 over the last 12 years, maybe more, because there's been some years where I was a part of 3. I think one year I was a part of 4. And then I've also hosted probably about 12 retreats, I think, something like
Wow.
that of my own, maybe 13 retreats. So, so my experience is a little bit different, right? Because I feel like when I started getting into it already, I had the lifestyle very down, and I was comfortable and confident in what I was doing. And I was going there more as just to experience it and connect with a lot of like-minded people, but also from a stance of like just trying to be in service and help in any way I could, and so.
That's beautiful. And how did you get to that point to actually get comfortable around other people to eat the way you do, to have giant bowls of fruit? Yeah, what is something that has helped you to become confident in what you're doing and to not get annoyed by all the people asking all the time? Because I think we all know it. It's kind of a drag.
It can be,
When
yeah.
no matter where you are, if you're in a social situation, you get bombarded with questions. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I think first it takes time, right? It just takes some time. I had a little bit of a leg up, as you may say, because I was always a little bit counterculture with like skateboarding and like a little bit of a black sheep and stuff like that. So I was already used to it a little bit, being a little bit of the odd one out. But I think the big thing is just to not really give a crap, really just to be like, this is what I'm doing for me, like this is what's true and important to me. And if someone else is going to make a big deal out of it, that's more on them, and beyond that, also just to learn to kind of lean into discomfort a little bit. I mean, that's really how we grow, and it's through being okay with feeling a little bit uncomfortable that we come deeper into that acceptance, and we become much more clear on what makes us feel good, right? Because oftentimes it is actually like feeling a little bit awkward and being in that situation, but allowing ourselves to feel awkward, that we go through it more gracefully than if we reject it and try and like pretend or try and overcompensate or anything like that.
Wow, that's some amazing advice. Thank you so much. Yeah, and I also want to just say real quick, if anyone has questions, you can feel free to comment them down below. Also, if you have any questions about the bundle that is going on right now, which you could find in my link or in Chris's link,
Yeah.
you can get that there. Yeah, so if you have any questions about that or just anything, now is the chance to ask 2 people who have a lot of experience with this lifestyle. And yeah, and is there any other advice, any last advice you would give to people in case no one has a question anymore?
Yeah, for sure. And I think kind of going along that flow of like creating a relationship with food, in this, I've heard this, Doug said this before, paraphrasing, but I think it just needs to be said much more often is, when we kind of come to the place where we recognize that like, fruits and vegetables are human foods. They're like, the most nourishing, the most easily digestible. All it really comes down to is finding the foods that you love the most, like really embracing the foods that you genuinely enjoy and love the most. And, by doing that, you're just going to immerse yourself in love, because those foods are just like nature's love for you. And you can't help but feel more connected to yourself and, more satiated and just feel better and better. And it's really a diet of abundance. There's no need to feel scarcity or to feel like you're going to overdo it, especially when we're talking about fruits and greens. It's like, if you enjoy it, enjoy the heck out of it 1000%. Like if you could have another bite, have 2 more bites. It's really, really hard to overdo. You basically got to force it. So as long as you're focusing in again on those foods that you love the most and trying to make it you know, a slow, deliberate process where you're enjoying it and you're trying to be present, like you're gonna feel golden. It's pretty awesome.
Wow, that is such an amazing tip. I love that. I mean, it's so obvious
Yeah,
to eat the things you love, but it's so often overlooked because we're so focused on what we have to do and we're putting ourselves in all these boxes and telling ourselves, oh my God, I have to do that because that's good and this is bad. But actually just focusing on what you love, I love that advice. That's so, so good. And I guess if no one has any more questions, then we're gonna hop on to your account and we're going to talk about how and why to integrate yoga into your life. So I'm super
absolutely.
excited for that as well. And I guess we'll have a little toilet break, if you want to call it.
Sounds
And
sounds good. Sounds good.
then we can hop over to your account.
Sounds good. Yeah, the last thing I want to add, because I forgot to
Mhm.
mention it actually, is with the foods you love is seeking to find those foods, like seeking to find those foods you love that love you back just as much. You know, it's just like a relationship in life,
Mhm.
right? If you know, and it doesn't matter if we're talking about like sport or food or, you know, like love relationships or friend relationships. You know, the more aware we become of how the equal and opposing forces are, you know, like if you're always giving, always giving, always giving and not getting, you know, that's an unbalanced relationship, right? And the more we focus on those relationships with food, with ourselves, with others that give as much as you give, you know, give back, it just makes things a heck of a lot smoother and more harmonious.
Oh, that's so beautiful and so deep. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you so much for being here and having this
Pleasure.
interview with me. It's such an honor, really, for me. So really grateful.
Reciprocated.
And
Absolutely.
all right, then let's have a little toilet break, and then we'll see each other on the other side.
Sounds good. I'll be live in a couple minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, something like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
All
Okay. Thank you
right.
so much for inviting me on.
Yeah, you're welcome.
See you in a couple minutes.
Yeah, see
You
you.
guys.